Evolution. Radio. The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and FreedomSlips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, FreedomSlips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
You're back with David Mackey's Shiny Side Out on Revolution Radio, the number one listener supported talk radio station on the net. So push the donate button, or just simply buy some merch from the station. It'd be great. Easy support. Spread the message that the station exists and help us all continue to thrive on this platform. And those lovely words you just heard were from the station's founder. May Nighthawk rest in peace, and he's kept alive in some way. He's in our thoughts, and let's understand that he didn't ever know that the virus came and went. He passed away before that, sadly, and if the virus hadn't have come around, I was, on track to going to meet him, because I'm from Australia. Maggie and I live in Australia. And apparently this is not a fake country. We're not crisis actors. We're real. And sadly, that put all those plans on hold. We never got to do it, and then he sadly passed, and that's tragedy. So guess what? You need to get yourself some merch, like I said. You can get a t-shirt, a mug, or anything you like. It's all the artwork on them is done by a mad painter, from what I understand. If there's any exceptions, the management team will let me know. So, also, I want to thank you for listening to Revolution Radio. Really, it keeps all of the hosts' roles and shows alive, and it's a really great thing to do. And look, engage someone outside in your real life with information you've learnt from Shiny Side Out, or Revolution Radio for that matter, more widely. And someone goes, so how do you know that? Oh, I know Revolution Radio. Really? Wait, what's that? Oh, look, I'll send you a link. And get someone else involved. That'd be great. Because, look, there's people, Mackie, I'm going to say, there's a lot of people out there who know most of the stuff we talk about. In some way, shape, or form. They know it. They just don't have someone to speak about it with. And that's really important, to be able to engage people. Don't be awful, but, be kind and nice, and let's try and make a better world for ourselves. This, today, we're halfway through the show number 594. Pause for Mackie.
19,500.
And this is part 5 now of Confusion of Languages.
Right.
Great topic. Great topic. I did speak about this with my friends, actually, on the weekend.
Nice.
And, so, Mackie, tell everyone how you found this, because initially we did the show, right?
Yeah, look, we did a show on myths, comparative myths, because the thing is this: the further you go to the past, if there was an event, that triggered memory and triggered stories, then it should be, if it's a global event, then it should be similar stories for all of it. And what we focused on was the global flood, and we had a lot of it. My God, I think it's still the longest show that we ever did. But oddly enough, there was nothing on language confusion, because some of them spoke about it, but there was very little. And then I looked again some years later, and all of a sudden there's this flood of information, which seems to follow the pattern. There's a flood, and human beings are punished for something, like the first race, the Adamu, whatever. and then another race arises, and again reaches heights of achievement, usually culminating in the building of some kind of edifice, a tower or structure that reaches up to the sky or the moon or the gods, whatever it is. So something's being built, and the gods or God or gods and demons or whoever is up there or down there, as it were, looks down up at it and goes, "Hey, that's not good. Look at those little humans doing all kinds of things. When they get together, they can really, once they put their mind to something, they can really achieve those guys. Look at them." And what inevitably happens is the edifice is destroyed, and it could be, again, many different things. Sometimes it's a tree. And at the same time, the people's language is confused as well. And it's really interesting, because in some parts of the world, which may not have been privy to the fact that something was being built or someone was trying to reach something high up or something like that, right? They just have a story of language confusion. They remember the flood. They don't remember building something that angered the gods, but they do get their language confused just the same, which in my mind is even more powerful evidence. Because if it was cultural bleed, Dave, if it was just a story that everybody told each other and, over time it just got to everybody, then there should be the same basic elements.
You're being punished. The same, that's right, yeah.
Yeah. No, they could be different punishment, whatever, but or different, agents that punish you, but there'd be punishment. In some stories, it's just we all went mad, and we couldn't understand each other anymore. And what Dave and I have speculated is that, in fact, it was not a spoken language that was our original language, but rather telepathy. Because with telepathy, you do not think sentences at each other, right? It's like so. What I'm saying right now is not necessarily what I would telepathically transmit to you, but rather concepts, feelings, thoughts, experiences, etc., like a proper communication, right? So lying would become very difficult, not impossible, but difficult, and there would be less room for misinterpretation and confusion, because this kind of communication is much clearer and much more to the point. And rather than me saying something, you can actually you would understand immediately how I feel about it. You would understand my sentiments. See, it's great for sentiment, because you can say something and it could mean 1,000 different things. But if you understand my sentiment that goes with what I'm trying to communicate, all of a sudden there's a lot less risk of interpretation, right? Less conflict. So that's pretty much what led us down the path of, well, is telepathy in fact a thing? Is it possible? We shared some of the stuff with you over the last few weeks. Interestingly, there were quite a few articles that the CIA seems to have disappeared, as it were, from the world, because we went to their Freedom of Information site. Now, we won't be talking about it today. We will talk about it soon, though. And we found articles on not crazy articles or articles from the woo-woo people, but like scientific investigations into telepathy and what parts of the brain may in fact be involved in something like telepathy. Now, we have some of these articles. We downloaded them from the site. The unfortunate thing is that one of the articles, which is fairly long, has about 4 or 5 pages missing, and I can't find that article anywhere on the internet.
Yeah.
The only existing copy that I could locate was the photostat, like a photocopy of seemingly either a magazine or a book, whatever, right? That was attached to the file of Freedom of Information, but it's missing 4 or 5 pages in the middle. And there's just nowhere else that article seems to exist. We'll get to that though. So that's where we are in broad strokes, everybody. So we postulate here very clearly and very directly that the original language of us was telepathy. And we discussed babies, Dave, right? and how they seem to be so frustrated. How come you don't understand what I'm thinking at you?
That's right.
I mean, if you have children yourself, or you've been around children, young, pre-verbal children, right? This is important. Pre-verbal.
Yep.
These are cries of frustration because they can't understand why you can't understand them.
Mm-hmm.
And that got me thinking with my own kids as well, right? And we have twin telepathy. Yeah, I know there's not good evidence for that, but there are times when you pick up a phone and the other person that you're going to call picked up the phone at the very same moment and finished dialing. This is important. They didn't just pick up the phone. They finished dialing the same moment that you did, except they dialed you.
That's right.
You see? And sometimes they might pick up and you're the one that dialed, but they picked up before it rang. But I have had it where someone told me, no, I just called you. No, I called you.
That's right.
Ring. What?
We've said those same things. Yeah, exactly.
I mean, the chances of that happening, I mean, if you tried it, you couldn't do it.
No, that's right. Yeah.
It's my point. In fact, I give you $1,000 if you can demonstrate to me that you can do that with your buddy. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And this was in the time of rotary phones, mind you. Now, which brings us, of course, we also discussed with everybody, I guess, the artificial, psychotronic telepathy. And again, our esteemed colleague, Solaris Blue Raven, is an expert. Oh, well, not just an expert, but a sufferer and a victim, I guess, in some. Well, even though I don't think she wants to think of herself as a victim. Obviously, she's not a victim in that way.
She's stronger than that, Mickey. Yeah.
Exactly, but she was certainly victimized. I think is the word, right? She was. What's the best word? Heinously exploited, in my opinion, with some of the experimentation and some of the things she was involved with. Emerging stronger, as you would expect from her, of course. But now she's probably one of the leading researchers in this field. She showed a few books, and she did, and she published a few books. So she did documentaries as well. In any event, look it up. It's really interesting. But that's sort of like cheating telepathy, right? This is mechanical telepathy, and it's not really telepathy. You still see, yes, it is. You're not speaking to anyone, but you're transmitting. Oh, that's it.
Flashes like, of light, Mickey.
Yeah, yes. It's the difference between a record player and a CD player. That's what it is. A record player captures the analog waves, sound waves, and scratches them into whatever material.
It vibrates. Yep.
Yeah, and then you get the true sound, the actual sound, as it were. Whereas a digitalized sound is translated into zeros and ones. Now, you can do that really, really well, right? But it will never be as good a sound experience if you're one of those audiophiles. And I've got friends that are their speaker cables, Dave, are as thick as my arm.
Yeah. I got a friend that has that too.
It's just nuts, right? But he's in Singapore and he can afford it because there's no tax in Singapore. But the point is, it'll never be that. It'll be it will always be an approximation. And I know you've done math in school, everybody. When you do math on a curve, or you're trying to what's the word? What's the math called? You're trying to get closer and closer to the actual thing, right? And what's it called? I can't remember the branch of math.
Spiral thought.
No, maybe.
No,
but it's derivatives, I think. But no, not even. Anyway, so under a curve is a natural thing. But what you're going to do with math is you're trying to get closer and closer to the true shape of the curve, but you will never get there because you're only ever approximating it. And that's what's happening when you digitalize anything. You only ever have an approximation, a really, really, really good one, but it's only ever an approximation. And it's the same with, in my opinion, technical or artificial telepathy. Which brings us, of course, Dave, to today's topic.
Super cooperators.
That's the one, my friend. Why don't you get us started? Because that's really interesting.
Perfect. Clear and direct telepathic communication is unlikely to be developed, but brain-to-brain links still hold great promise. In a letter he wrote in 1884, Mark Twain. I'll tell you, he was ahead of his time. lamented that telephones, telegraphs, and words are too slow for this age. We must get something that is faster. I know a microwave phone would have been really good back then. We should, in the future, communicate, he said, by thought only, and say in a couple of minutes what could have been inflated into words in an hour and a half. Fast forward to 2020, and Elon Musk suggested in an interview that by using his neural net technology, warning, Will Robinson, a lace-like mesh implanted in the brain, we would, in principle, be able to communicate very quickly and with far more precision. Ideas and language, for instance. When asked by his interviewer, Joe Rogan, actually I remember this interview, how many years before you don't have to talk, Musk responds, if the development continues to accelerate, then maybe like 5 years, 5 to 10 years. Despite the very real progress the previous century brought for our understanding of both language and the brain, we are no closer to telepathy than we were in Twain's time. The reason we will argue is that the telepathy we've been promised, the sort envisaged by Twain and Musk, and popularized in countless movies and TV shows, rest on a faulty premise. Good old-fashioned telepathy, or GOFT. I love that. Mackie, do you know how good it is to name something and then you don't have to worry about it anymore?
That's right.
That's another perfect example of it. It's called good old-fashioned telepathy. It isn't just telepathy. No, it's the old-fashioned version of it. You mean the one that we could kind of do if we practiced, but oh no, shush. Involves a direct transfer of thoughts from one mind to another. It has captivated people for a few reasons. First, it bypasses the limitations in the vicissitudes of language. With GOFT, we no longer need to struggle to put each concept into words or to decode someone's language. This bypassing of language is a central feature of GOFT. Good old-fashioned telepathy. It is what licenses science fiction writers to imagine humans and aliens communicating telepathically despite not sharing a language, culture, or even biology. Second, GOFT promises more precise and genuine communication. The ambiguity of language is legion. We all have experiences of saying one thing only to be understood as saying something else. Wow, that's why hand signals, Maggie, came into play. And, I know there's one signal that I don't think can be misinterpreted. So, and those are just the miscommunications we are alerted to. Because language is so flexible, it is also easy to lie and contradict yourself. These apparent shortcomings have for centuries inspired inventions of artificial languages that try to remove ambiguity and duplicity. A direct thought-to-thought transfer would seem the ultimate solution. Finally, good old-fashioned telepathy promises faster communication. Many of us have the intuition that we can think faster than we can speak or write, and that having to rely on language and to communicate is an impediment. It is no coincidence that one of the aims of Neuralink, Musk's neural interfaces telepathy startup, is to allow humans to communicate at the speed of thought. Mackie?
Absolutely. Now, this article is again talking about stuff that's being done right now. It's being developed right now. In my opinion, I think it is a violation of the natural order. and I think we should not do this. I think we should develop our natural capabilities. But it's interesting to understand what's happening. Now, at the root of GOFT, which is the good old-fashioned telepathy, however, is a problem. For it to work, our thoughts have to be aligned to have a common format. Now, I will disagree with the article because we don't know anything about real telepathy. Okay, so why do our thoughts have to be aligned? I mean, is it not equally valid to assume that our thoughts are aligned? In fact, maybe thoughts, because they are insubstantial, right? You can't actually touch a thought. You can't touch a feeling. You can't touch anything really on that level. You can look at the chemical processes in your brain that might give rise to these things, but you can't really physically manifest them as such, right? It's not like an apple. So is it not possible that therefore thought is like pure thought, not necessarily language thought, but thought that in its abstract form, where you communicate concepts and entire emotional structures, is already a standardized format, and maybe across species, and maybe just maybe it is a true quantum phenomenon, because don't forget, scientists now believe that our brain is quantum 100%. Right. And it seems to function in 11 dimensions. We'll get to that at some other show, but suffice to say that's where our current scientific thinking sits. So I think it's a wrong assumption to make that our thoughts have to be aligned to have a common format. Now let's go back to the text. Alice's thoughts beamed into Bob's brain need to be understandable to Bob, but would they be? And my postulation, or my stance here is that yes, absolutely it would be. Absolutely. To appreciate what real alignment actually entails, consider machine-to-machine communication that takes place when Bob sends an email to Alice. For the seemingly simple act to work, Bob and Alice's computers have to encode letters in the same way. Otherwise, in an A type by Bob would render something completely different for Alice. The protocols used by Bob's and Alice's machines for transmitting the information are, SMTP, POP, etc., also have to be matched. That's true. Again, what we're doing here, though, is we are comparing apples and bicycles.
That's correct. I like the bicycle, though.
I know. It's a completely different thing. And I'll tell you why I think that is. We can feel distress. Feel distress. Experience distress, if you will, even from creatures that are not us. You know when your dog is in distress. You see an animal in pain.
Yeah.
You see distress, right? And sometimes, this is a bit more esoteric, you feel when someone close to you is in distress.
Yeah.
So the SOS signal, at the very least, seems to be standard, right? Across species, across, certainly family members as well. So I think it's the wrong assumption. So what they're saying is every human being, this is what they're saying, has a different operating system. That's essentially what they're saying. Every human being has a different operating system. If your operating systems are underlined and they don't use the same protocols to communicate, then telepathy is just not possible. Right?
But they're calling out GOFT here as already being a thing.
Yeah, that's right. But they're saying
that's the underlying tone of the article.
You're not wrong. You're absolutely right. But they have defined GOFT as a thing, but they've defined it as a limited thing in their understanding, and they base their understanding on how we, for example, have built up our machine culture, if you will. Yes, we have different machine operating systems, and back in the olden days, there were different protocols. TCP/IP just happened to win. Yeah. There's UDP, there's others as well. We used
token ring, Mickey.
Oh my goodness, I remember the token ring. Okay, so these are different protocols that existed to enable communication between computers. Before that, computers didn't talk to each other, believe it or not, right? At least not the way we understand it today. We didn't have networked infrastructures. Okay, my my Commodore 64, my C64 didn't connect to the internet.
Mm-hmm.
Because there was no internet.
That's so true.
Now, I could have networked it with local machines, and it would have been a precursor to tokenry, to be honest with you. But I didn't, because I couldn't, because it didn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
So, but our analogy in this article here is completely wrong. Nonetheless, we'll let's keep going, because it's important to understand where science thinks it is. Now, if that email we just discussed has an attached photo, additional alignment must exist to ensure that the receiving machine can decode the image format, JPEG, for example, used by the sender. It is these formats, known collectively as encodings and protocols, that allow machines to understand each other or one another. These formats are the products of deliberate engineering, and they required universal buy-in. Just as postal systems around the world had to agree to honor each other's stamps, companies and governments had to agree to use common encoders such as Unicode and protocols such as TCP/IP and SMTP. But is there any reason to think that our thoughts are aligned in this way? Yes, I think so. The article, however, at present says, we have no reason to imagine that the neural activity constituting Bob's thoughts, for example, I'm in the mood for some truffle risotto, would make any sense to anyone other than Bob. Indeed, we're not even certain if Bob's mental state could be interpreted by Bob himself in a year's time. How then does Bob communicate his risotto desires to Alice? The obvious solution is to use a natural language like English. To be useful, these systems have to be learned. But once they learn, they allowed us to communicate, through a common set of symbols, English words, as it were, right? To token particular thoughts in the minds of other English speakers. It is tempting to assume that the reason why language works as well as it does is that our thoughts are already aligned, and language is just a way of communicating them. Our thoughts are packaged into words and then unpacked by a receiver, but this is an illusion. It is telling that even with natural language, conceptual alignment is hard work and drops off without actively using language. You see, what they're doing is they're making the exact opposite argument to the argument Dave and I are making. And let me unpack that, because this is really, really important. That's why this article is here. What they're saying is language is flawed. Yes, agreed, tick. But it's not flawed because of language. It's flawed because of us and the way we understand things. Now, that's actually incorrect in their analysis. Language is flawed because it tries to relay feelings, concepts, abstracts from one person to another. But when I say chair, simple example, when I say chair, everybody knows what a chair is. Mm-hmm. But what specifically is a chair to you? What do you picture in your mind? What, like Immanuel Kant puts it, the nomen, the thing in itself, right? The archetypal idea of anything, right? What is the thing in itself? What is the essence, let's say, of chair, right? And that's what they're getting at here. Now, in my mind, okay, once we telepathically communicate, then my understanding of chair, right, is the same as your understanding of chair, which is a multitude of possible outcomes of chair. But as an abstract, as a concept, we all know what chair is. Now, in the physical world, we might draw different things of what a chair is. We could, right? But we all have the same essence of chair in ourselves, right? And once you've experienced it, it becomes part of your mental makeup. So if I have a concept maybe that is new to you, so let's say Dave and I are talking telepathically. Here we go, blah, blah, whatever, right? And I transmit a new concept to Dave. He has never come across it, ever. Let's say a green banana that grew on Mars, and Dave has never seen a banana, and it's a completely new thing for him. He doesn't know anything about a banana, okay? Dave has never, ever experienced a banana. In my version of telepathy, once I think banana at Dave, he knows all about bananas. He has experienced bananas because I've experienced bananas. Because I'm not just transmitting the concept or the word banana at him. I am giving him all of banana-hood, all of banana-dom, right? The essence of banana is now with Dave. And that's where right. We differ in our interpretation or definition. I was actually thinking about that. Our definition of telepathy is opposite to the one in this article. But nonetheless, let's keep going. Anyway, natural languages thus accomplish a version of what machine protocols and encodings do. Yes, that's exactly right. And that's why we were given language, to slow us down, to corrupt our ability to communicate effectively. That's the punishment that everybody talked about. The language confusion. We were given language because it is confusing to talk in words and concepts. And when I say chair, I might mean something completely different to you. When I say peace, what you hear is war, right? 100% correct. So they got it ass backwards, pardon my French. Right? So, where are we? It's tempting to assume that language on this view does not depend on prior conceptual alignment. It helps create it. Would it be possible to create alignment between our thoughts? Some way to transform Bob's mental state into some form that is compatible with Alice's, or better yet, with everyone's thoughts. Let's consider 3 possible solutions. The first is to transform our thoughts into a natural language like English, rather than beaming raw thoughts from one mind to another. We beam words instead. This could work. No, it couldn't. But of course, everyone involved would need, to have a shared language like English, turning telepathy just into fancy texting. And that's pretty much kind of what psychotronics is. The second is to computationally transform raw mental states into some common format, a universally understandable language of thought. As of right now, there's no reason to think that such a transformation is possible. No, there's, again, this is Mackie speaking, it's not necessary to transform, because that's, in my mind, in my opinion, that's how we naturally communicate. Again, look at babies. Okay, look at how animals communicate. Look how they hunt, and there's a level of telepathy involved, which we'll get into at some point as well. In fact, if you have synchronized activities of groups of people that have been together for a long time, telepathy just naturally happens. You don't know it, and you don't actually do it. It just happens.
That's right.
When you learn to ride a bicycle, like one day you couldn't ride a bicycle. You fell off, you kept bumping your head and your knee and grazing your elbow and everything. Right? You couldn't do it. And the next day, you're riding a bicycle. What happened? It feels like you've always ridden your bicycle. It's not really, initially you go, oh, I'm riding my bicycle, how great is that? But then you're just riding a bicycle. You no longer think about it. Right? It's just something that your body has now mastered. Mm-hmm. In my mind, telepathy is exactly the same. Initially, it might be like, oh, wow, look at that. But once it's done, it's just like drinking a cup of coffee. I can do it. I can drink a cup of coffee. I know how to do it, right? I don't have to think about it. Telepathy, I think this is very similar. Now, let's go back here. As of right now, there's no reason to think that such a transformation is possible. But it is conceivable to us that such a system can be used to transmit general states. For example, distinguishing yes versus meh, and perhaps mental images. But we don't see how this method would work to transmit arbitrary thoughts, a main promise of good old-fashioned telepathy. Dave?
Is this genuine communication or somewhat macabre remote control? The third is to map specific thoughts to specific meanings in a predetermined way, creating a kind of telepathies. As it happens, modern attempts at telepathic communication, of which there are now a few, are just such attempts. Let's take a look into 2 of them. In a study in 2014, a team of researchers led by the computer scientist Rajesh Rao paired people to jointly play a game, trying to fire a virtual cannon to defend a city from enemy rockets. In each pair, one person, the sender, could see a screen showing the position of the target but could not fire the cannon. The other person, the receiver, could not see the screen but could press the fire button. The 2 players were linked with a brain-to-brain interface created by connecting the sender to an electroencephalograph, an EEG, device for measuring small voltage fluctuations evoked by brain activity using electrodes placed on the scalp. These voltages were then used to trigger magnetic pulses in transcranial magnetic stimulation, or TMS, machine positioned near the receiver's scalp. These magnetic pulses, when delivered to the part of the scalp overlying a specific part of the motor cortex, produced muscle contractions in this case, caused the receiver to press the fire button. Wow. Right. Let's put aside the question of whether this is a genuine communication or a somewhat macabre remote control. One could imagine a more finessed version in which the magnetic pulse only suggests rather than causes the firing action. But, however, much we finesse it, the information being exchanged is highly specific and meaningful only in this specific context after being briefed, the sender and receiver, using natural language on how the game works. The message being sent through the EEG signal is not a thought or idea. Rather, it is quite literally the motor command that would ordinarily drive the sender's hand muscles to contract. Is there a way to extend this type of brain-to-brain interface so that it is less tied to a specific game? In a study published that same year, the psychologist Carl Groh and colleagues also coupled a sender and a receiver using EEG TMS rig. Senders were instructed to imagine either moving their hands or feet. The resulting EEG patterns can be distinguished and used either to trigger a TMS coil to stimulate a receiver's visual cortex or to deliver a pulse that did not produce phosphenes. So, what we have is a setup where a sender can think about a thought, e.g. imagining her feet or hands moving, which causes a receiver to perceive or not perceive a phosphene. This method can, in principle, be used to communicate arbitrary information. For example, one can use Morse code. Hello becomes dot 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 dash, etc. Where hand imagery is a dot, the arm imagery is a dash. This, of course, is slow and error prone. But the real problem, is that this too is not good old, what's it called again?
Good old-fashioned telepathy.
Fashioned telepathy, thank you. Although we are now closer to the signals being thoughts, their meanings need to be prearranged. They're either falling back and on English words, such as brain-to-brain texting using Morse code, or requiring senders and receivers to learn a new protocol, such as associating a particular pattern of on-off signals with a particular object. Here again, we already have such a protocol that we learn in infancy language, from telepathic communication to telepathic coordination. Mackie, go on.
Alrighty. Now, again, the funny thing is this. This is not the text, sorry, I'm just talking now. The funny thing is this. We already know that telepathy is in fact real, right? We know this, and then we'll share those articles with you when we get to them through Freedom of Information Act from the CIA. But even on another level, we know it's true. Forget babies, forget animals. Experiences have told us that the communication they have with the entities that abduct them are largely telepathical. They do not move their mouths to speak. They communicate telepathically, but not in words per se. Right? It's emotions, feelings, dreads. And the funny thing is this as well. Part of the phenomenon or the phenomenology of UFOs, cryptoids, strange places, etc., is feelings. Feelings. And if you listen to or watch these documentaries, if you read the books, if you talk to people that are experiencers, one of the strongest feelings that they get when they encounter some of these phenomena, not all, but some, is dread. Dread. So we know that emotions or emotional equivalents are being broadcast at you. So instead of having a warning fence that says, this is restricted property, there will be an arms response if you go any further, it's a much more effective, Dave, if you think about it, to just transmit feelings of dread. It's so strong, in fact, that you just turn tail and run. And that's what we see over and over and over again. But we also see the opposite. In native cultures, especially Native American, it's a blessing to see a Sasquatch. Whereas white people, usually white people or Western people, non-native people, have this feeling of dread when they come across them. Native Americans don't have that feeling of dread when it comes to the Bigfoot. It's fascinating stuff. So we do know that this transmission of at least feelings and emotions is a thing. It happens, And sometimes we go to a place and we get a feeling from that place, right? Which is it makes no sense at all. Yet there it is.
Did I lose Mackie?
Now, bear in mind, this article. That's right. Bear in mind, this article was allowed to be published, not like the ones we pulled off the FOIA side, right?
That's right.
This was allowed to be published. There are some ways of aligning our thoughts, perhaps, by training people to use highly specific protocols of the sort used by Grau and colleagues. But by requiring alignment in advance, many of the key benefits of telepathy threaten to be lost. Instead of being able to communicate with people using our thoughts alone, we must first be trained on, essentially, how to be more alike. Instead of getting a new window on alien ways of thinking and reasoning, this form of telepathy would work only if almost everything was already the same, hence when aligned. But perhaps there's hope for telepathy, or something like it. For there's another way of thinking about telepathy that suggests intriguingly different avenues for empirical research and experiment. To see what we have in mind, it helps to take a step back and ask what language is for in the first place. One possibility, the one that seems most aligned with our reflections on alignment, is that it's a means of sharing thoughts and information between individuals. But information sharing is beneficial only insofar as it leads to different actions. This opens up a different way of thinking about language and about the prospects for a kind of newfangled telepathy. Instead of viewing communication between people as a transfer of information, we can think about it as a series of actions we perform on one another, and often on ourselves, to bring about effects. The goal of language, thus understood, is not always alignment of mental representations, but simply the informed coordination of action. On this picture, successful users of language need not demand conceptual alignment. This view of language as a lever for coordination, a tool for practical action, can be found in research by Andy Clark, Mark Dingmancy, Christopher Gauker, and Michael Reddy. And again, I want to highlight here that this research is freely available for anyone to read, which means, of course, that it's completely useless when you think about telepathy. By way of analogy, consider the notion of interoperability, but applied to gross physical abilities. Two people of very different heights and weights can cooperate to move a piece of furniture around some tight corners together. They might even signal to each other along the way. For this to work, the signals need to bring about the kinds of bodily effect, perhaps pushing at one end or raising the item in the air or whatever. But beyond that, there's no need for a conceptual, let alone phenomenal alignment at all, apart from having a shared goal. Practical alignment is all that matters. Dave?
Yeah. Linked people then carry out variations or various joint projects. They say, for instance, they work on school assignments, move couches, fall in love. Viewing language as a lever for practical coordination, the prospects for something a bit like telepathy start to look different. Instead of viewing telepathy as potential means to communicate our inner thoughts and experiences, transferring them from one mind to another, we can think of telepathy in terms of new channels of casual influence, channels that one day might be exploited to coordinate joint actions. Existing brain-to-brain interfaces could play this role, even if they are congenitally unable, due to the lack of sufficient conceptual alignment, to act as a kind of direct transmitter of the content of one person's mental representations to another. With this in mind, imagine now an alternative version of the sender-receiver setups used in Rao and Grau's studies. Instead of instructing people to induce a particular mental state to communicate in a predetermined meaning, there is simply a two-way brain-to-brain channel opened up between the two or more individuals at a young age. The linked people then carry out various projects. They work on school assignments, move couches, fall in love. Might their brains learn to make use of their new channel to help them achieve their goals? Good question. This seems, to us at least, or the author, to verge into more plausible territory. I think they would... they'd end up with a hatred for the people who put those devices in their head. Something similar seems to occur when two people, or even human and pet, learn to pick up on body language as a clue to what the other person is thinking or intending to do. They're to a different channel, in this case vision, with different targets, small bodily motions, convey an extra layer of usable information, and one not easily replicated by other means. Any new, initially purposeless brain-to-brain channel could be variously configured, conveying traces recorded from different neural areas, or averaged across many such areas. It would be a matter of trial and error to discover what kinds of configuration work best, and for what purposes. But the goal of these new bridges would be not to bypass either person's intentions, as in designs like Rao's, so much as to enhance the basis upon which they form and implement their intentions. To our knowledge, says the author, this kind of experiment has never been performed on humans or any other animals. Something like it was imagined, though, by the neurophilosopher Paul Churchland in his book The Neurocomputational Perspective, 1989. Churchland imagined a hockey team that trained and played with direct wireless brain-to-brain links in place. Such a team might benefit from the very rapid transfer of signals carrying information of many kinds. Perhaps Churchland speculated that players would learn ways of understanding each other that were far superior to those made possible by normal linguistic communication. This is because he regarded public language as a limited and impoverished means of communication, one whose job might be done much better by some form of direct brain-to-brain link. Our view, says the author, by contrast, is that the power both of public language and any future brain-to-brain bridging lies in their ability to act as levers for joint action, while papering over differences in underlying representational spaces. I'm just going to pause there. Okay, so if you want two people to hate each other, handcuff them together. It's not going to be a pleasant experience in the long run. They're going to hate you for doing it. They'll probably, if they ever got free, they'd hunt you down. So I think we already have this skill anyway. And apart from the visual cues and just knowing what the person's going to do, if they get the ball, for instance, in a game, because they always do it. It's just a thing. I don't think that is the best way to achieve it. Sure, if a whole team were all linked up, and there was a supercomputer just making them move around the field, they're not doing anything. They're not doing anything. It's the supercomputer. AlphaGo. AlphaGo plays soccer for the first time. Wins 99-0, right? Because the other team cannot react fast enough. Do you know what I mean? That would be a very strange place. But using silent language, instantaneous transmission between humans already, because these comparisons are they're between artificial and natural telepathy, is what this whole story is about.
Yeah, 100%.
Right? So I think we've already got the skills. Importantly, there is reason to think that human brains possess all kinds of flexibility and plasticity required to make good use of new kinds of channel and/or channels of carrying new kinds of information. A simple sample is the North Sense, a small silicon device that is attached to the chest and delivers a short vibration when the user is turned towards magnetic north. Sure, good for you. Users report quite rapidly, starting just to know, moment by moment, their orientation relative to the important distant places such as their home or their children. The school gates, maybe the school.
Mm-hmm.
Is this way a constant drip feed of new directional information is rapidly assimilated, there's the word I was looking for, into the cognitive ecology of the wearer. So assimilated here, that's used by the Borg, and they're all connected to the hive mind. And would you want to be connected to the hive mind?
Mm-hmm.
Would you really?
Exactly.
So, or consider this. I'll do this paragraph and I'll hand it back to you. So, or consider sensory substitution technologies. A blind person's cane delivers a stream of information that can be used to aid object identification and localization. But for a higher bandwidth experience, this is like the glossy brochure, a head-mounted camera linked to an electrical grid attached to the tongue can deliver patterns of electrical simulation that bear information about the distance and shape of out-of-reach objects. Information that can be used to drive object recognition and apt action. There are also commercially available systems that deliver visual information using patterns of sound rather than touch. For example, such device as iMusic. In all these cases, subjects attempt to perform various actions, and as they do, the resulting video feeds are translated into touch, electrical stimulations, or sound. With time and practice, it is possible to learn the signature pattern characteristic of different encountered objects, distinguishing plants from statues, circles, blah, blah, blah. I really don't care, and so on, it says. Mickey, the blind guy that had great hearing,
yes,
and he was just making those tick sounds?
Yes, oh yeah, echolocating.
And he was able to attune his hearing to listen to the reflections, and was more than able to do it himself without having the burden of recharging your devices.
That's correct.
So
the human.
So because you could do it yourself, this is one of those advertising specials where they, create a problem and go, we can sell you the answer, and then, hey, but this guy's doing it without it. Let's not say anything about that.
Yeah, that's right.
We won't sell as many,
That's the problem. How do we make money out of this? Look, the article is pretty much done here. It goes on to say, Goff, this is, good old-fashioned telepathy is probably not possible, etc., etc. But it was important to get everybody on the same page, because there's this misconception as to what telepathy actually is, and I think, and people are making the wrong assumptions going forward. But like I said, there are scientists, and there have been scientists, and this goes back at least as far as the 80s and 70s in some cases, sometimes even 50s and 60s, and probably further back even than that, where we have scientific studies that were undertaken and have not been released to the public, or have been released but have like 5 pages missing. So these people argue that telepathy, the way Dave and I postulated, is not possible. That's what they say, essentially. Because, it just can't work. Therefore, opening up the door to psychotronics and artificial electronic telepathy, which is not really telepathy. All we're doing is, in essence, we're just putting transmitters and receivers into our brain. That's all we're doing. And rather than speaking a command, we're thinking the command, and it goes out. That's really what psychotronics is, essentially. That's, in my opinion, a very poor substitute.
If you really want to be remote controlled by some supercomputers at some point, go ahead, knock yourself out.
That's exactly, and that's the danger. Dave got it in one, because you're opening yourself up the way. And there's the music.
Stay tuned for Jer Bear's awesome show After Hours, and we'll catch you at 7 o'clock on Tuesday and Thursday mornings, Eastern Time in the US, for an hour of Plato's Cave, and we'll catch you again same time, same channel. In the meantime, stay safe.